First of all, why is the Book of Ruth associated with Shavuot? Shavuot literally means weeks, W-E-E-K-S, weeks. It's the holiday of weeks. If you've been following the Omer count, you know we're now at the point that we're over 6 weeks, closing in on 7. And you'll see when we finish the Omer count, as if you've been doing it every year in your life, you know it. And if you're new to it this year because of those emails we send out, you'll see exactly 7 weeks, just as they say, 7 weeks from the end of Pesach, from the second day of Pesach in the Golah, the first day of Pesach, not the Golah, 7 weeks till Shavuot. And there are many reasons we count Omer. The one I like to point out is that it connects Shavuot with Pesach. Pesach is the holiday of liberation, freedom from slavery. But that's not the end of the story. Because if all you're celebrating is freedom from slavery, you can just read the daily newspapers and study history of all these societies that overthrow their cruel dictatorial leaders. And before you know it, they're just as bad. The next gang are just as bad as the last gang. It's not that they're against torture. It's just they want to be the ones to torture. And we'll see what ends up in Syria now that they threw out Hafez al-Assad. We'll see whether this new guy turns out to be better. We know that Hafez al-Assad threw out the guy before him, and it was the same. We know that Ayatollah Khomeini got rid of the Shah, which meant that he also got rid of the Shah's secret police that used to torture. Now we know why the Shah's secret police tortured, because they understood that if this country ever falls to the other guys, it's going to be worse and we can't compromise. And those guys got rid of the torturous Shah secret police. And you know what Iran has been for the last 30 years or whatever since then. So most societies, frankly, I have to say this very carefully, take African Americans. African Americans overcame the horrors and, of course, unfairness of slavery, how they were brought from another continent in chains. The movie Amistad gives a good feel of it. They came to the United States, became slaves, and then they were emancipated. And the whole story of slavery is a horrible story, of course. Of course. So they were emancipated. It's now 150 years later, 1865. The speech was 1863. It was implemented 1865, 1965, 2050. It's 160 years later, and many are still demanding reparations after affirmative action and diversity, equity, inclusiveness, DEI, and after the Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. And they're now demanding reparations, certainly in the state where I am, California. And academically, the data speak for themselves out of the colleges. Data speak for themselves. So they went free from slavery, and 160 years later, new. All right. So Pesach represents our emancipation. And Shavuot is what made our emancipation different from every other emancipation. Why did we not end up needing DEI and affirmative action and reparations? Because of Shavuot, the giving of the Torah. We never were really completely free. We simply exchanged slaveries, servitudes. We went from servants to the Pharaoh to become servants to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to God Almighty. But we were imposed upon all these restrictions. You can't, on Shabbat, you can't do this, you can't do that, 39 avot malacha, and then there are derivative malachas. You're not allowed to do all this stuff on Shabbat. And in fact, to people who don't live Shabbat and just hear about it, it sounds terrible. If it's explained the wrong way, it sounds like a day you can't. I've had that when I would explain to non-Jews. So, Zadov, what's Shabbat about? When I was a lawyer, and occasionally someone would ask me, so what do you guys do on your Sabbath? And well, if you start saying, well, you can't drive and you can't turn on the lights, you can't do this, you can't, it sounds horrible. Those of us who live the life of Shabbat know that we wait all week for Shabbat. That's the best day of the week. But just to explain it sounds horrible. Kashrut. You can't eat this and you can't eat that and you can't eat this. I live in Orange County. If you're living in New York City, if you're living in Los Angeles proper, you have more choices. Orange County, there's one butcher in the whole Orange County for 100,000 Jews, not 100,000 Orthodox Jews. Very fewer, but there's only one butcher. They don't have a pizza store in Orange County, Kosher Pizza. I'm not saying that as a joke. It's like the restrictions of kashrut. You go on a vacation. That's why so many people go to these Pesach five-star hotel vacations, because otherwise, what are you going to do in a lot of places? Okay, if you're going to Paris or you're going to Rome, there's always kosher restaurants and things like that, which, by the way, is not me saying that that's a good thing to do. I don't go to any European countries. I have no interest in financing the budgets of any European country. They're all criminals when it comes to Jews. But so there's a couple of kosher restaurants, but by and large, what are you going to do? Take a vacation in Montana? You're going to go see something in South Dakota. You're going to see the carving on South Dakota at Mount Rushmore. I don't know what kosher food you're going to eat. So you're going to pack tuna sandwiches and a thing of salami. And even that, you go to the supermarket. They have Hebrew National. It's a whole nother story. You can't buy that. For most of us, we don't hold by Hebrew National. Don't want to get into that too much. So what happened was when we went free, we exchanged 7 weeks later a new set of restrictions. And married couple, the idea, go ahead and explain to non-Jews that in a marriage, for like the first 30 years till the wife is somewhere around in her 50s or whatever it might be, that for like the first 30 years of the marriage, the husband and wife are not supposed to have physical intimacy half of every month. Go ahead and explain that to non-Jews or Reform Jews. So what ended up happening is, interestingly or curiously, is that we became a very successful people. That unlike all the other people who went free, unlike the tragic story of Black America, after the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 and the actual Emancipation of 1865, the tragedies that they've all undergone. I mean, by contrast, look at our situation. It's extraordinary. We are successful everywhere we go. We encounter anti-Semitism. They massacre us at some times. And nevertheless, 2,000 years plus, 3,000 years plus, our story is a success story. Depends on what you want to focus on. Notwithstanding everything they've done to us, we've come out better than everybody else. Not only that we're still around, but we do very well. In fact, one of the stereotypes against us is that they're jealous. How do we do it? How does a country in the Middle East surrounded by all those Arabs trying to kill you and by all the Europeans and everybody else all giving you your friends trying to kill you? How do we do it and succeed? If Israel would be poverty-stricken, it would be a miracle. Can you imagine the country, these Jews, albeit they're more poverty-stricken than Darfur in Sudan, but they're still around despite everything? And yet you've been to Israel in many cases. Look how well they're doing. It's unbelievable. It's a Western country. They rank 4th in the world in the happiness of their population. I guess they don't read newspapers. It's amazing. So Shavuot is very, very importantly connected to Pesach. The existence of a people who were liberated from slavery and nevertheless took on new form of slavery with severe restrictions, but slavery to God Almighty. And by accepting upon us Ol Malchut Shamayim, the yoke, Y-O-K-E, of the heavens, we are successful. So Shavuot marks the giving of the Torah. Importantly, that means Shavuot is, there are two holidays that mark the giving of the Torah, Shavuot and Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah celebrates the written law, Torah Shabbat. We have been reading a weekly portion for 52 or 54 weeks, whatever. And then Simchat Torah, we're all done, and we're going to start all over again with Breshit. Just finished Zot HaBracha, the end of Sefer Devarim, Moshe's final charge to the tribes, and then passing away at Har Nevo, buried by God Almighty. And then we go back to Breshit, Bara Elokim et Hashemayim v'et haaretz. God, in the beginning, created heaven and earth. So Simchat Torah, we celebrate the written law, Torah Shabbat. Shavuot, we celebrate Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. That's when Moshe Rabbeinu went up Mount Sinai, and for the next 40 days learned the oral law. All of the Torah that would not be written in the Chumash, but rather all of the overlay, the overlay of the mitzvot and the overlay of the narrative. Moshe Rabbeinu learned it at Mount Sinai, and there are certain things that appear in the Chumash that he wasn't even taught. And we've talked about this a million times. He wasn't told at Mount Sinai that one day you're going to be called upon to send spies into the land of Israel. And you're going to send the following 12 guys, and 10 are going to sabotage everything. If he were told that, he wouldn't have sent them. He didn't know that's going to happen. He wasn't planning. So he was taught oral law, not the Chumash. He wasn't taught that you're going to be told to take a rod to a rock and hit the rock and bring forth water, and you're going to do something wrong. And he didn't know that's happening. So he wasn't told what's going to happen in Sefer Bamidbar, Sefer Devarim, etc. He was taught the oral law. And that's what we celebrate on Shavuot, the oral law. The custom is to stay up all night, Shavuot night, learning, whatever you want to learn. Many learn the oral law, Gemara. Some learn Navi, learn whatever. Some learn Musar, books like what's a good example? There are so many Mesilat Yesharim, books of Musar, or they learn a little bit of each. Some shuls get together and they have members of the shul. Each is assigned to teach an hour or half an hour. Some communities, all the shuls get together in one place, and all the Orthodox rabbis in town go to one central meeting place, like in a small place that doesn't have a lot of people to begin with. And those rabbis kind of create the thing. So Shavuot is marked by eating dairy and flowers. Flowers because the Jews were at Mount Sinai and it's the desert, and yet the Torah tells us that as they reached the mountain, it was that the sheep, they brought their sheep with them, and the sheep were grazing at the foot of Mount Sinai in the middle of the desert. So there was grass. Where'd that come from? Middle of a desert. So in memory of the miracle that the Torah was given amid grass and flowers that popped up there, it became a thing to have flowers at home. The shuls put flowers out. There was, I think the Chatam Sofer, I could be wrong, but I believe it might have been the Chatam Sofer who said he opposed putting flowers in shuls. He said it's too much like Christmas, that the non-Jews deck the halls with bows of holly And he said it reeks too much, even though the motivation is not to reflect on it, not to imitate the non-Jews. Nonetheless, he forbade it. But by and large, the mainstream use do the flowers. And what's with the dairy? Several things. Number one, there's a tradition that Moshe Rabbeinu on his way up the mountain told the people, until today, you've been able to eat any meat you want. We got out of Egypt. We brought all of our animals with us. We brought our livestock, sheep and cows, cattle, and we've been eating meat, and we've been eating other things. I'm going upstairs to Mount Sinai, and I have advance notice that I don't have the details, but there are going to be all these laws and restrictions as far as what you're allowed to eat and how you're allowed to eat meat. So once those restrictions are handed down, they go into effect. I don't know whether I'm going to learn it the first day of class or the 40th day of class. But from that moment, you can't go around eating meat the old way. You have to know the restrictions, and I don't know what they are yet. Therefore, nobody's eating meat. No meat until I come back down. So they ate dairy. So that's one reason. Secondly, dairy, the Hebrew word is halav. Chet lamed bet. Gematria is the term for every Hebrew alphabetic letter. Every letter, it didn't have to say alphabetic. Every letter has a numeric value. The equivalent, as if in English, we would say A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, Z equals 26. So Hebrew has that. Every letter has a numeric value. Often, the letters themselves are used as the numbers. And so, like, for example, when we say we live now in Tufshin Pei, that's 5785. So the numbers have numeric value. Chet lamed bet. Bet is 8, lamed is 30, bet is 2. You add up the three letters, it's 40, 40. So chalav, milk, dairy, equals 40, the number of days that Moshe was on Mount Sinai for Shavuot. So that's the second reason we eat dairy. And there are some other reasons. It's tied in with the number of sacrifices, Korban Chagiga. There's some people are under the misimpression that you eat only dairy, only cheese blintzes and cheesecake. You're supposed to eat meat on Shavuot too. They actually eat like 2 meals. Some people dairy one meal and meat the other meal. Some people have some dairy, then they wait half an hour or 10 minutes, and then they have some meat. You're supposed to have meat on all the Chagim. The tradition is that meat is seen as more bountiful and more celebratory, and therefore you have meat on Shabbos and Yom Tov. What about vegetarians? They say that Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, was a vegetarian, but he made an exception on Shabbos. 6 days a week was vegetarian, they say, and Shabbos he made an exception. That on Shabbos you eat meat. On Yom Tov you eat meat. Shabbat, Yom Tov, Chag. So Shavuot, even though we're having dairy for reasons I just mentioned, we also eat meat. We just placed our order. We're going to get some meat, we're going to get some dairy. What about people who can't eat meat, let's say? So you can't eat meat, so you don't eat meat. If you can't, you can't. What about people who are lactose intolerant because they don't produce lactase? So you try lactate, and if it doesn't work, you do what you got to do. You know, what are you going to do? But for most of the people who can handle the stuff, that's what's done. Okay, that's the story with dairy. Third and finally for now, Ruth. So Ruth, the Hebrew name is Ruth, Resh Vav Tav. Again, let's look at the numbers. The letter Resh is 200. Vav is 6 on that gematria, and Tav is 400. 200, 6, 400. the name Ruth equals 606. There are 613 mitzvot in Judaism. Ruth's name equals 606. And the story of Ruth is that she took on Judaism. She converted to Judaism. All non-Jews are obligated to 7 mitzvot, Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, to 7 Noahide laws. So she began with 7, and she took on 606 additional mitzvot, making 613. And that's Ruth. She's the reason we read the Book of Ruth on Shavuot, partly because she took on the Torah. And this is the holiday we celebrate Matan Torah, giving it a Torah. Partly because it takes place during the time of Kitzir Sa'orim, the barley harvest, the Omer harvest. Omer is a measurement, is a way of measuring grain. How many Omers did you gather? That's why we call it counting the Omer. It's counting the 7 weeks of the Omer gathering till they have the final count, which, aside from religion, in an agricultural society, that's what it's all about, having food. So it's a big celebration. Baruch Hashem. We had to celebrate. Let's say we had a successful barley harvest, Baruch Hashem. So a successful Omer. That's what's called counting the Omer. So it takes place, the entire story of Ruth with Boaz and everything takes place during the barley harvest, which is this season right now. So one reason we read the Book of Ruth is she took on the mitzvot, 606 mitzvot plus 7. Second reason, the Omer season. And thirdly, she's the progenitor of King David. She gave birth to Oved, who gave birth to Yishai, who gave birth to David. And our tradition is that David, who's born, died on Shavuot. So Ruth and Shavuot. So that's why I saw a question, first of all, when is Shavuot? Israel Shavuot is 1 day. In Galut, exile, it's a 2nd day also. Why do we have an extra day in Galut? There are many reasons. I don't want to take more time away from studying with you now, but very, very briefly, the Samaritans, the Shomronim, were evil people. You heard of the Good Samaritans from the Christian Bible? The Samaritans were evil. You could even prove it from the Christian Bible, because when they talk about there was the Good Samaritan, what does that tell you? There's a Good Samaritan. It would be like the good Gazan, the good Hamas member. I met a good Hamas member, Kivyachal, as though it were possible. The fact they talk about the good Samaritans were evil. And among many, many evil things they did, they convinced King Cyrus, who permitted us to return from Babylonia to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem, and they convinced King Cyrus to stop us. We were in the midst of rebuilding it, and they convinced him to issue a new decree to stop it. So we had to wait for King Darius, Darius, to give us the okay in a later generation after a coup or two to allow us to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. The Samaritans also did something to screw up our calendar. In those days, how did you know it was Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month? A new month would be declared by the Beit Din in Jerusalem. Witnesses would come to Beit Din and testify they saw a new moon. The Beit Din would cross-examine them until they were satisfied these witnesses know what they're talking about. The Beit Din would declare a new moon. We hereby decree today's the new moon. And the word got out, and there were people stationed on mountaintops throughout Arutz Israel up to Babylonia. And they had torches. And they would light the torches, and they would send a signal, like smoke signals, but it typically was at night. And they would say, you have torches in the daytime, it isn't going to be effective. So what would happen is they would do the signals, and then the guy in the lookout on the next hill would see it and signal to the next hill. And this would go from Jerusalem all the way to Iraq, to Babylonia. And all the Jews would now know it's Rosh Chodesh. So first of all, it took a little bit of time. And for the people in exile, in Jerusalem, in Eretz Israel, they knew which day the Bet Din had announced the Rosh Chodesh. But by the time it got to Babylonia, there would be some doubt. We just saw the sign. Is the sign, did this happen today? Did they announce it yesterday? And we're just getting the news today. So out of abundance of caution, they added a day. And then later the Samaritans started a thing where 2-3 days before Rosh Chodesh, they would start doing their own torches. And they screwed everything up. Because we realized we don't know these are Samaritans, we don't know what's going on. And that's when they made it calendar. That's when they built Rosh Chodesh into a calendar, so that you don't any longer need to testify to Bet Din. It's automatic, the way we live today, thanks to the Samaritans. But there was an uncertainty, so that's a reason that there's an extra day in Golah. Furthermore, it's to remind us that we don't have the same level of spirituality. If you're living in exile, you're not living in the Holy Land, and you need a second Seder, a second Shavuot. You need a second night of Sukkot and second night of Shmini Atzeret with Simchat Torah. You need more to get into the spirit. You need like practically the first day to clean out the goyishness of living among goyim every day, with the goyish values around you. And you'll tell me, well, you might not tell me, but a person might say, well, Israel, they've got that too. And that's Bavonotenu Rabim. Unfortunately, in our sins, there are those in Israel who have a goyish mentality, who believe that the ideal in the world is America. And therefore, American culture is what drives them on Kaplan Square on Saturday nights. So you have that. But there's no question. For anybody who wants to say, look at Kaplan Square, you're going to look at that and look at this and look at all of Tel Aviv. There's no question. You've been to Arutz Israel, the Torah, the feeling of Torah. Even if you're not, the non-religious complain there's too much Torah in Israel. There's too much orthodoxy in Israel. And the sirens that go off Erev Shabbos, that it's time to light candles and cities and towns where the buses don't run. And all the restaurants, or most of them, or a great many of them, are under a hashgacha of one type or another. There's no question. By contrast, in America, all the schmutz, American television, all the schmutz that comes out, and all the schmutz in the culture of America. I'm sorry. I mean, in my own lifetime, in your own lifetime, in many cases, the America of today is not the America of 1960. And the America of 1960 is not the America of 1920. And the America, not to say that the old days were always better, that the Ku Klux Klan had a lot of bad stuff. But nevertheless, so you need a day to get rid of the schmutz. You sit down the first night of Pesach, the first night of Sukkot, you're getting rid of the schmutz. And then you have the second night. So that's another reason we have a second day of Chag in exile. I've had people come to me, like Reform, so religious. I've had Reform rabbis say to me, but now we know the Samaritans and we know which day it is. So we, the Reform, only do one day, because we know. And then you look at what a Reform sukkah is in the Reform temple. You look at their sukkah, their one day or Shabbos. They meet Friday night. Many of them, most of them, almost all of them, they meet Friday night. They don't even meet Shabbos morning unless there is a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. Remember, I used to walk with my wife, Ellen Zachron Levrach, my son Aaron. We'd walk to shul, we'd pass the Reform temple. And they're always closed on Saturday. They're closed for Shabbos. And then every so often we would notice there's a lot of stuff going on in their parking lot. You have all these ladies wearing mini skirts and posing for pictures. And whenever they would have like a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah or what they call b'nai mitzvah, it's just like for an hour in the parking lot, all the ladies in mini skirts, and everybody, all the guys dressed like John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever, and they're all posing for pictures. And then they go inside and have like a 1 hour service for the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. Other than that, they don't even meet for Shabbos. So they're not a proof of anything. The last part of this, in our intro, Yom Kippur, so why don't we have 2 days Yom Kippur? If we have 2 days at the beginning of Sukkot and end of Sukkot, and 2 days Sukkot and Pesach and Shavuot, what about Yom Kippur? Rabbi said Rachmanis. Rabbi said mercy on the Jewish people. Said we're not going to impose a 48-hour fast. And on the other hand, Rosh Hashanah is called Yom Ha'arichta. In Aramaic, in the Talmud, Rosh Hashanah is 2 days even in Israel. Rosh Hashanah is by structure a 2-day. So why don't they make it 3 days? Same idea in a way. The rabbis did not want to create 3 consecutive days of not being able to do X, Y, and Z. Too much of a burden on the tzibur, on the community. Since it was only a d'Rabbanan, adding that extra day is only precautionary. So that's the deal with Rosh Hashanah, 2 days anyway, and Yom Kippur, 1 day anyway. Same reason we have only 1 day of Tisha B'Av, 1 day of all the different fasts. So that covers a lot of overview and about Shavuot. We'll be marking Shavuot this year, Sunday night candlelighting time into Monday, and Monday night outside of Israel, Monday night into Tuesday. So it starts Sunday evening at sunset, and it ends Tuesday at nightfall. And that's Shavuot. And unlike Sukkot and Pesach, there's not Chol HaMoed in a long extended week. It's just that day when Moshe Rabbeinu received the oral law from God at Har Sinai. Okay, let's learn some root. I don't want to have the reputation of being a rabbi who's ruthless. Okay, here we go. Thank you so much for being with us today. Again, first chapter, more detail, subsequently, more quickly. We may run over, as always, feel free to leave if your time schedule requires it. Let's see what we can do without taking more time than we have to. And for time, I'll often read English rather than Hebrew and translating. I know that you trust that I can read Hebrew. So it was the days of the Shoftim, the judges. The Book of Ruth takes place during the same time before the kings and the prophets, during the time of the judges. We've been learning on Tuesday night, or Thursday night, happens to be about Devorah the judge, and Barak and Yael and Sisera. That period, the judges like Gideon and Samson, Shimshon, during the same era, Ruth takes place. Why, of all the righteous people, is there a separate book there's the Book of Judges? Why is there a separate book about this one lady? Surely there were other remarkable, extraordinary men and women during the centuries when there were judges. Because the Tanakh wanted to tell us more about the lineage of David, who would be the greatest of our kings and the progenitor of Mashiach. So this is the key story. It's to remind us also that non-Jews bring a great deal into the Jewish world. Not all non-Jews, maybe not even the majority, but that a Jew must not look upon all non-Jews just uniformly as though non-Jews are no good. We need to remember that Mashiach is going to come from a non-Jew, from David, who came from Ruth. No Ruth, the Moabitess, no David. It's one or the other. The same way, there are other great people in Jewish history who came from non-Jews. He played a very important role. Tamar, who was not the Tamar of the story of Tamar and Amnon, but the story of Tamar and Yehuda in the Book of Bereshit, who was not Jewish. And from her comes Zerach and Peretz, again, a lineage leading up to David on the other side. So it is very important to remember that certain people have come, and Moab came from the daughters of Lot. He was the nephew of Abraham. It's very important to remember certain people, that righteous non-Jews who impacted and changed Jewish history for the better also. Goes both ways. When you meet someone who converted to Judaism, you should honor and respect them with great honor. If they're an honest, not Marilyn Monroe converts, not Reform converts, but when you meet someone who took on the mitzvot, Shabbat, Kashrut, Taharat HaMishpacha, the mikvah, you should honor such a person. Don't say it to them, because they want to be thought of like everyone else. So don't go and say, I honor you that you converted to Judaism. Maybe on the day that they converted, but like 6 years later, they wanted to be thought of like everybody else. It's like when I was in Israel on Aliyah, it annoyed me when people would constantly say, oh, you're American, I hear your accent. It would be like, I want to be Israeli. I want to be like everybody else here. So the first year, okay, but I've been here longer than that, and stop always telling me that I have an American accent. It's annoying. So all the more so, we should treat converts with extra respect and understand in many cases they don't have connections. They're not networked in to the different cliques within a shul and a community. It's very important to reach out to them, but not to do it in a way that you're patronizing. But just that it's challenging. People aren't all very good at that. So there was a ra'av, there was a famine in the land of Israel. Nowadays, when there's a famine, we're not getting into the politics of gossip. Nowadays, when there's a famine, because of whatever it is, in the international commerce, you can get water from another American state, from another country. You can get food from elsewhere. But in those days when famine hit, you were up the creek, and there was no water in the creek. So a man who lived in Bethlehem, which is near the Jordan River, crossed over the Jordan River with his family, wife and 2 sons, to get out of the country amid the famine and go to the Moab, because Moab was not hit with famine at that time. So he went to stay Moab, the fields of Moab, with his 2 kids and wife. The man's name was Eli Melech. The rabbis tell us he was perhaps the richest Jew of his time. And his motivation was he was afraid that everyone in the country would start knocking on his door for money and supplies, and he did not want to be bothered. And so he decided to escape the burden of helping and would return later. But what happened, as often happens, is when someone leaves Israel for the exile, truly expecting to return later, life gets in the way. Life happens, develops its own momentum, and it becomes hard to go back. And it is very, very evil for judgmental people, let's say, who are living in Israel, to look at someone outside of Israel and start being judgmental and start being accusatory. Everybody's got their own story. And it is important for each person primarily to worry about making sure that his and her own matters are in order before God, rather than sitting and judging. But life happens. I personally have experienced how life happens. And here I had a wife, Rabbi Ellen, and we had all our plans. It was all there. There's absolutely no reason that would have held us up. I had a shul that I had a responsibility to, but I reached a moment that my shul I could not honestly say that the shul needed me not to leave. and all systems would go. And it was sort of like, ready to go, Ellen? Let's do it, Dov. And then she was diagnosed with glioblastoma, a form of cancer. Life happens. And then she passed away, and I regrouped, pulled myself together. She's buried in Arutz Sheva. My future gravesite is next to hers. And I was ready to go, and interstitial lung disease. Mazel tov, lung transplant. That's how life goes. That's my story. I could tell you your stories, but that would be invading your privacy. But everybody's got a story. So that's important to understand. His is less acceptable, the rabbis say, because his sole motivation, it wasn't like he was a guy in Israel and he couldn't make it and he needed to go out, or opportunities were closed, or people treated him wrong, or he's blacklisted, or everything was good for him. Everybody wanted to be him. And he left because he didn't want to help anybody. So he left with his wife, Naomi. Now, Naomi actually means pleasant. And originally that her name reflected her very pleasant status. And they had two sons, Machlon and Kilion. The rabbis tell us they had different names. And their names are recorded in history as Machlon and Kilion. Machlon from machala, illness, disease, Kilion, destruction. Their names were changed for the text. The sons, disease and destruction. Nobody names their kids that. But they rapidly encountered disease and destruction. And they were Ephratim. There is currently in Judea a bustling Jewish community called Ephrat. It's near Beit Lechem, and that's also where Rachel died in childbirth. Ephratim mi-Bet Lechem Yehuda, Ephrat near Beit Lechem, Bethlehem, in Judea. Vayavos de Moab Yusham, they went to Moab, which is across the Jordan River, on the other side. Vayamat Elimelech ish Naomi. The rabbis tell us that he died because he was punished for what he had done. And the rabbis tell us he did not simply get stricken dead, that God does not punish simply by immediately striking someone dead, that he sustained several setbacks. First, he lost his cattle, lost his sheep, and he lost his money. He started encountering one loss after the next, and finally God killed him, took his life. Ish Naomi, so his identity no longer is significant. At the beginning, he was significant. Shem ha-ish Elimelech. He was the man, Elimelech. Ish means man, also means, let's say, master. And now he's Ish Naomi. He's remembered no longer for who he is. His sole claim to anything to be proud of is that Naomi was his wife. I remember the psychological thought in my mind, not the same thing, but for many years, people would say to my little boy, "Oh, your daddy is Rabbi Fischer, Rav Fischer." It was one time I picked him up from Yeshiva High School. He'd accomplished something, and someone said, "This is Aaron's father," and I felt proud. I felt proud. The kid is making a name for himself. He's no longer my son. I'm his father. Very nice, very nice. But he's Ish Naomi, not so nice. That his identity is lost. All he has left. So what's the takeaway on that? Because when I teach, I don't just teach a book or a story. I try to teach values and ethics. Is that a man and a woman needs to serve God and needs to have the right values. And Judaism teaches it and appreciates it. And Judaism does not appreciate people whose values are bad, and it catches up. Vatisha erhiu shnei vaneha, So now all that's left is she and her two sons. It's inevitable. You're living in Moab. There are no Jewish girls there. So they end up marrying Moabite girls into marriage. And what are you going to do? They are growing up. They want to marry. Looks like they're not going back to Arutz Israel. And they marry. One is Orpah, and the other is Ruth. Vayeshvu sham ke'esher shanim, and they were married and stayed with them 10 years. By the way, I read that, so it's like real, I'm not making this up. Oprah Winfrey is named, her mother named her for the biblical character, and her mother got it wrong. But Oprah made a name of herself anyway. But Oprah she's supposed to be named for Orpah. The second is Ruth. Now, let's look at some comments. We're at verse 4. Let's take a look at some comment meantime. They were from Ephrath, Bethlehem, Yehuda. They were important people. Let's make this a little larger for you so it's easier for you to follow too. Okay, let's do that. They were important people. He was an aristocrat. Look how important they were. Eglon, the king of Moab, they went from Israel to Moab, where the king took his princess, his daughter, and married his daughter to Machlon, gave Ruth. So Ruth was a princess, the daughter of the king of Moab. It's interesting, we've been learning in Tuesday nights about how Tamar, who was raped by Amnon, was the granddaughter of the king of Geshur, the daughter of Ma'acha. Ruth was the daughter of the king of Moab. So there's that. So she was royalty. Important to know. She was, and it tells you, the king, I got to marry off my daughter, and here I am, the king of Moab, and I know the Zhlubs who comprise my kingdom. I'll marry her off to the Jew. That's what happened. In those days, it wasn't merely about love. It's not like you come to the father and say, we fell in love and we married, we eloped. You got married if the father approved. And the king, yeah, what, you're too good to marry one of our own here. I want you to marry a Jew. So that's the story of Ruth. Now, we'll get back to this next part in a moment, next comment. So they were married 10 years. Vayamutu gam shneim, Machlon v'Chilion. And both Machlon and Chilion died by the 10-year mark, leaving two widows. Vatisha ha'isha mishnei yeledeha omei isha. So the woman, Naomi, is now left. He has no more sons and no more husband. Isha with a yud and a dot in the hay. That's called a mapik hay, grammatical term, mapik hay, and that's a yud. Isha means ish shala, her man, her husband. Isha without the yud or the dot means woman. So the woman, Naomi, no more sons, no more husband, she's alone. So she got up. She has nothing more to live for in Moab. She has no more household, no more family, no more income. You know, in those days, they did not have life insurance and Social Security, Medicaid. If you didn't have boys, primarily boys, or girls married to boys, to work your fields when you got elderly, you were in big trouble. And it's happening to her a lot younger. Here she was well set. The family's financially loaded, and she's got two boys she'll have in the future when she's retiring. And now she's got nothing. She's got two daughters-in-law. So she basically, Vatashav Mistei Moav, Kishama Abistei Moav, Kipakar Shaman Amolat, Tetlahem Lechem. she decided to depart from Moab and return to Israel because she heard that now Israel is fertile again. And they've got food. So she got up with her two daughters-in-law, Vatelachna, and they went. That's for Telachna is the female conjugation, and it can mean they walked or they went, Baderech, they went on Lashuv el Eretz Yehuda. They went to return to Judea. And this again it's not called the West Bank. The land has a name. Jerusalem has a name. Bethlehem, Beit Lechem has a name. Shechem has a name. Hebron has a name. Yehuda, Judea, has a name. Never was called the West Bank. And Christians have this Bible too. So Christians who know their Bible, they know it's called Judea. It's not called West Bank. V'tomer na'ami l'shtei chaloteha lechna shovna isha levetima. You should both go back. She says to Orpah and Ruth, go back to your families. The party's over. My sons are gone. You're actually very good daughters-in-law, wonderful daughters-in-law, but it's over. Ya'as Hashem imachem chesed ka'asher asitem im hametim v'imadi. May God do with you righteousness, chesed, the way you always did with the deceased and with me. Rabbis say, what did they do for her? What did they do for Machlon and Kilion, their husbands? So this is the Midrash Ruth Rabbah, where she says, may the Lord perform kindness with you as you perform with the dead. The Midrash is that they meticulously sewed Jewish shrouds, tachrichim. When a Jewish person dies, God forbid, they're buried in shrouds, tachrichim. If a man, they also bury him with his talus. They cut off one of the four corners because it no longer is, they're not going to bury a religiously usable talus, talit. So they cut off a corner and the man is buried with his shrouds and his talit. And if he's buried outside in Galut, exile, they put a little bag of soil from Arutz Israel into the coffin. That if he couldn't be in Arutz Israel in his life, he's buried with some soil from Arutz Israel. It's, again, people don't know this. People do not know the Jewish connection to the land of Israel. When people start with free Palestine and river to the sea and all this garbage, they have no idea how beyond being indigenous, how, like they say, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm only anti-Zionist. Zion, Eretz Israel, is baked into Judaism. It's baked in. It's like, I don't know, mashed potatoes with butter. And someone says, I don't eat butter. And someone else says, I'll make you a new set of mashed potatoes without butter. No, I'll just take the butter out of the mashed potatoes you just made. You can't take the butter out of the mashed potatoes. You cannot take Eretz Israel out of Judaism. If someone hates Zionism, someone hates Judaism. It's like taking kashrut out of Judaism. So you have to be buried with tachrichim. And they, the non-Jewish wives, wanted their beloved husbands to be buried in the manner of their ancestors. So that's the chesed they did for them. And with me, and what's the chesed they did for Ruth? That you relinquished your marriage contracts. I've explained many times in the past that a ketubah is not a romantic document. Many people think that a ketubah is a romantic document. And they hang it, frame it, and they spend $1,000 on the ketubah to have a great artist make the ketubah, hand make the world's most beautiful ketubah, and they have it framed, and they spend more on the ketubah than on the wedding, definitely more than they spend on the rabbi, and they hang the ketubah in their living room. Ketubah is not a romantic document. It's a prenup. It basically says that the man, he's the one who signs it, not the woman, undertakes to provide for the wife's food and clothing and intimacy needs. And if there's a divorce, here's what the alimony is going to be. That's really what a ketubah is. So it builds in an alimony. And a man's obligation, likewise, if he dies, It's like not exactly life insurance, but it's like a will, trust, I don't know. So the rabbis explained to us in that pasuk that when Machlon and Kilion died, each had a financial obligation to Ruth and to Orpah to provide financial something to get them rolling again after the death. Not lifetime maintenance, but they had financial obligations. And the rabbis tell us that Ruth and Orpah waived their rights, the money they were entitled to. It'd be like waiving alimony, because with Elimelech dead and the boys gone, it would have fallen on Naomi, who now is broke, to pay off those two contractual obligations. So she wouldn't have been able to get away with it. And she wouldn't have been able to go to Israel because the Moabite country would not have let her leave until she had finished paying off her contractual obligations. So the rabbis tell us that's what she means when she says, "You have done great kindness to my sons," he made them shrouds, "and to me, as you have dealt with the dead, and may the Lord deal kindly with you as you've dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant each of you find security in the house of a husband." She kissed them goodbye, and they started weeping. They said, "No, we will return with you to your people." And then the question becomes, how do you interpret that? Not rabbinically, but when you meet somebody, I mean, what am I going to say? All right, instead of saying, when I encountered tragedy, so people would say, like say when Ellen Zichron Levracha passed away, or my father, when I was 14, he died of leukemia, he was 45. So people came and they said, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call. So it's a beautiful thing to say, but what does it really mean? Right? What does that really mean? I had a lot of things I needed as a 14-year-old boy with no father and no brothers. I had a mother, Baruch Hashem, Zichron Levracha, I have sisters, Baruch Hashem, but there were things I needed. I'm going to pick up a phone and call this one and that one, because he said to me, if you ever need anything, give him a call. I eventually went to Rabbi Drillman, Zichron Levracha, rabbi of the shul. And he indeed, in fact, that's part of the reason I became a rabbi, because this 14-year-old boy saw that while there were dozens of people who said, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call, only a rabbi is positioned in a way that he can actually make a difference in the 14-year-old boy's life. And I wanted to do that with my life and pay it back. So that's part of my story. But each and every one of us knows. So when they say, no, we're going to go with you to your people, is that taken literally? Or is that a nice way to part? Naomi said, it's like a little bit of negotiating here. Don't be silly. Go back home. Why should you go with me? You're two widows. I don't have any more sons for you. Even if I would find a man tonight and have intimacy tonight with a man, it'll take 20 years and it'll turn into a pregnancy. It'll take 20 years, 25 years till I'm able to provide another husband for the two of you. And by then you'll be 25 years older. So turn back. I'm too old to be married. Even if I thought there was hope, even if I married tonight and I had sons, you gonna wait for them? That's ridiculous. The word aguna, a woman who for various reasons cannot marry, let's say a woman who gets divorced during the interregnum between the divorce and when the husband gives her the get, she's aguna, she's chained, she's unable to marry because she doesn't have a divorce document. So in the same way, she's saying, why self-agonize and deprive yourselves of a chance to marry somebody? And if you come with me back to Israel, Jewish men, it's not like today where you have the son of George Soros runs to marry an Arab Muslim and fasts on her fast day, or Anthony Weiner, the disgraced congressman who was married to the same Arab earlier. It was an article in the New York Times that he fasts on Ramadan, a Jewish man, and he fasts on Ramadan because he was married to that Arab Muslim. So that's the modern era, like Doug Emhoff. But in those times, a Jew did not marry a non-Jew. What happened in Moab with the sons of Ruth was extraordinary because of the circumstances that the family had been uprooted. There are rabbis who say that the boys and Ruth did not, and Naomi did not even want to go. But Elimelech was in charge in those days. The man was in charge, and they all followed. Okay. So if you girls come with me to Israel, no one's going to marry you. And the Moabites historically are our enemies on top of everything else. So don't. My lot is far more bitter than yours. Ki mar li ma'od mikem. I am very mar. I'm very bitter, like the word marora. Ki yotza v'yad Hashem, because God clearly has struck at me. I mean, this is no coincidence. The husband, the two sons prematurely, clearly, and that all came after the flocks and the sheep and the cattle and finances. Clearly, this is the hand of God. So they recognized the truth, and it is all over. They wept again. Orpah kissed the mother goodbye, and end of story. Orpah goes on an extraordinary midrash. I see I'm not going to be able to do chapters 2, 3, and 4 tonight, but let's give you chapter 1 in its totality. There's a midrash on this. So Orpah, the same night, Naomi saw prophetically that only one daughter-in-law would find security, Ruth, not Orpah. The same night that Orpah left Naomi, this is a midrash, it's not in the text, 100 Gentiles slept with her, and Goliath the Philistine, who was a king, was born from her. So I learned this years ago. I'm sharing with you tonight, but it's not the first time I've seen it. And I always, one of these days, unfortunately, we're at like 7:39, so I'm going to have to start moving towards closing no later than 8 o'clock, no matter what. So I would like one of these days to go in a little more detail about what we do with Midrash, how we deal with Midrashim that amplify the story, but they're not necessarily handed down by God. They are rabbinic kind of overlays that, are they to be taken at face value? Are they not to be taken at face value? If not, what's the point? But the midrash is that Orpah, when she now, you could say on the one hand that everybody wanted to go at Orpah right away, because since Ruth stuck with Naomi, Orpah effectively was the only woman in the entire country who ever had been married to and intimate with a Jew. Then you say, yeah, but 100 people that night? And then you hear about things that go on in India, where there's a gang shows, you probably know what I'm referring to, but 100 men in one night? And then I saw this about 2 months ago while minding my business. OnlyFans star Lily Phillips breaks down in tears after revealing she slept with 100 men in one day. So in other words, there's something to this midrash. OnlyFans star Lily Phillips documented sleeping with over 100 men in one day in a new documentary, and has plans for a larger goal in the next month. Let's find out how long she lives. I don't wish bad on her, but I'm curious how long she's going to end up living doing that. But it turns out it's possible. What's the date? I don't want to go lower because it's People magazine, so it's not outright porn, but there's a highly suggestive picture that's not appropriate for Torah class. But this is December 2020. This is 6 months ago, 8 months ago. No, December is 5 months ago. slept with 100 men. So maybe there's something to it. Who knows? So she slept. And what we do know is the rabbis are very, very clear across the board that that her son was Goliath. So in time, her descendant Goliath, not that he was the son, but he's a descendant, that Goliath was born from her, and David was born from Ruth. So their two family lines ended up intersecting again in a very, very different way from the way the forebears, who had been sisters-in-law, very close to each other. Now, Orpah walked 40 steps with Naomi here. From when Naomi started walking to the Jordan River to cross to Eretz Israel, Orpah accompanied her for 40 steps. Ruth accompanied her completely. From the merit that Orpah was worthy, because of the 40 steps she took with Naomi before breaking off, she had the merit that Goliath, instead of being killed on the first day that he challenged the Jews, remained standing for 40 days before Israel and King Saul, before he was killed by David. And then, of course, Saul's kingdom did not last, etc. And David, the descendant of Ruth, furthermore, etc., etc. We'll skip the rest of that commentary. We'll do a little bit more. We're going to keep learning a little bit more here. So they split off. And then Naomi says to Ruth, who's clinging to her, your sister-in-law, and you guys are really close, and your sister-in-law Orpah's doing what makes a lot of sense. Return to her people and her gods. So it tells us, what does it mean, and her gods? Orpah returned to her gods, the rabbis tell us. It means that Orpah did not convert to Judaism, but she took on elements of Judaism because she stopped worshiping her idols during the time she was with that family. So she did not become a Jew, but idolatry was so abominable to the Jewish family of Elimelech and Naomi. And Orpah liked the family. She respected them and she liked her husband. And she stopped worshiping. She basically just became neutral and went away from the gods of the Moabites. And Naomi's saying, go back now. She's going back to her statues. Go back. Ruth replied, do not urge me to leave you. This is probably the money line, I think they call it. This is like the money line in the Book of Ruth. Al tifkei bi la'azveich l'shu me'acharayich, ki el asher telchi elech ba'asher talini alin, amech ami ve'lo kayich elokai, ba'asher tamuti amut v'sham ekaver, ko yaseli Hashem v'cho yosif ki hamavet yafrid beinu v'nayich. I wanted to be sure to get this in tonight. Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, what can I say? Lodge. How shall we say that? Talini, wherever you sleep. Wherever you sleep, I will sleep, or I will lodge. I'll take shelter. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. This is her converting to Judaism. When people say, so why isn't it that easy nowadays? Why can't I just read those two times are different, circumstances are different, the halakha is different. Halakha is consistent, but stricter. All we have to do is look at Reform Judaism and their instant conversions, their Marilyn Monroe conversions, where you pledge allegiance to the Jewish people. Next thing you know, you're joining, your son joins Jewish Voice for Peace, and your next son joins If Not Now, and they're all marching against Israel, not in my name, and worse. So, but rabbis learn from it. She converts, where you die, I will die, there I will be buried. And she says that when Naomi saw how determined Ruth was to go with her, she ceased arguing with her. The Gemara talks about this. Let's see. Okay, let's go to the Gemara. Here we are. The Gemara reconstructs the original dialogue in which Naomi attempted to dissuade Ruth from converting. Naomi said on Shabbat, many of you probably have never heard of this. You know, you're not supposed to turn on the lights, you're not supposed to drive, not supposed to handle money, not supposed to cook, and you're also not supposed to walk more than 2,000 mil. It's like miles thing. Not exactly. It's just a measurement, but it's known as you need to set up an erev chatzerot. You need to set up erev chatzerot. You're not supposed to walk more than a certain distance on Shabbat. Now, just like there's an erev for carrying outdoors, you're not allowed to carry on Shabbat, but under certain circumstances, which we certainly have no time to go into it, it's permitted if you set up in advance before Shabbat, like a table with food, and as you're approaching the boundary of the maximum amount to walk, you sit down and there's that table with food, and you sit down and you eat a meal, then you get another 2,000. And if you keep setting up tables, that's what they did on Yom Kippur for the man who carried, who took the scapegoat, the Ez Lazazel, into the wilderness. He had to walk more than 2,000, and they had various food stations, and not food stations to eat food on Yom Kippur, but food stations where he sat down for a little while at a table, and then he could go on again. So anyway, Ruth says, Naomi says, forbid for us to go beyond the Shabbat limit. Ruth said, where you walk, I will walk. I'll follow it and no further. Naomi said it's forbidden for us to be alone together with a man, yichud, with whom it's forbidden to engage in relations. A woman is not allowed to be alone in a room with a man, with the door closed. That you know about the yichud room, like when they get wet. Ruth said, where you lodge, I will lodge. I'll follow the same rules. Naomi said, we're commanded to observe 613 mitzvot. Ruth said, your people are my people. I'll keep them. Naomi said, idolatrous worship is forbidden. Your God is my God. Naomi said, 4 types of capital punishment were handed over to court. There are 4 types of capital punishment, just like in the United States. Over the years, they've had the gas chamber and a firing squad, an electric chair, and different things, hanging. So there are 4 types of biblical capital punishment. And there are 2 types of, and there are cemeteries, burial grounds, where people who have been executed for one of those 2, one of 2 of the 4 would be buried, and another kind of cemetery, burial ground, for people who were executed for the other 2 of the 4. And she says, there I shall be buried. In other words, just as you have rules for being buried, I will honor that. Not that she's going to be executed. Immediately following the dialogue, the verse says, and when Naomi saw that she was steadfastly minded, she wasn't backing down, she desisted, and they learned from that. They learned from that nowadays. When a person converts to Judaism, you're supposed to slightly try to talk them out of it. You're supposed to make them go through 3 efforts. Someone contacts me, Rabbi Fischer, I found you online, blah, 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 blah. I'd like to convert to Judaism. I have to find a nice way to dissuade them without closing the door. Look, I'm very, very busy. This is a bad season. I've got a lot of stuff going on. Why don't you call me back in a month? If they call back in a month, thank you very much. Just had a lung. It's great. It's great to have a lung transplant. You can do so much with it. Look, I just had a lung transplant, and why don't you call me back in another month? This month is going to be different. And after if they call back a 3rd time, now we're talking. Now we're talking. So halachically, this is of course different from Reform, where their theology is to go out and recruit new Jews and encourage into marriage. It's okay. They encourage it. You have that in writing from the president of the Union of Reform Judaism. that our mission is to encourage intermarriage. It sounds, to an Orthodox Jew, it sounds like I'm making it up. And they make it easier than anything. But halacha, you have to try 3 times to dissuade them. But they learned from how Naomi stopped after she saw Ruth was adamant. So Naomi said, you can't have idols, and you're not going to be able to be, and we don't allow, you have 613 mitzvot, and there's this, and there's this. And then she stopped. And the rabbis are taught that if a person really means it, then you got to welcome them in. And you even facilitate, once they've established that they're serious, then you facilitate. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up now. Again, I would have loved to do 4 chapters, but there's so much, but I'm glad we did this. So it'll enrich, when you hear the Book of Ruth on Shavuot read, it'll enrich your experience greatly, I believe, for this first chapter. So anyway, let's just wrap up this first chapter. So Naomi and Ruth together went to Bethlehem. When they arrived, the city was shocked. According to the Midrash, Boaz, whom we are going to learn about in chapter 2, Boaz, his wife, had just died. And that's what makes him available to marry Ruth. Yes, you're allowed to marry in those days more than one wife. It was permitted, but typically it was often impractical, because if you wanted peace and a good marriage with your wife, you didn't just bring in another wife. Not so simple. If you have a good marriage, you just don't. And we actually see in chapter 4 with Ploni Almoni, another man, that he's first in line. He has right of first refusal to marry Ruth. And he says, I'm already married. I can't mess up my home life with another wife right now. So it was important that it just so happened that Boaz's wife had died. And on that day, because he was the single greatest man of his generation and was the judge, the shofet of his generation, the entire city was at the cemetery. So as Ruth, or as Naomi arrives with Ruth, the whole city happens to be there and sees them walking. Hazot Naomi, can this be she left looking like Melania Trump. She left beautiful and decked out in royalty and the most expensive outfits. And now she's coming back. She's a beggar in Jerusalem. And Naomi says, don't call me Naomi. The word means pleasant. Call me Mara. Mara, bitterness. I am very bitter. I went away full, and God brought me back empty. You can't call me Naomi. I've had so much misfortune. Closing chapter 1. Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabite. They arrived in Bethlehem at the time of the barley harvest. Just give me one last moment to be sure that I got in everything that I really wanted much to do. I'm just about, there was the 100. I'll skip that. I'll skip that because of time. And then we did this, and we did that, last 2 or 3. Yeah, 2 to go. And let's see, what's this? Okay, final. Okay, just to bring your attention real quick, when you hear it read in shul, chapters 2 and 3, they discuss the leket. The Torah commands in Vayikra 19, pertinent, uvekutzurchem et yitziratzchem lo techaleh pa'atzot chalik tzur. It's a halacha. And remember, in biblical times, we were an agrarian society. And the agricultural laws were even more important than many of the commercial laws at that time. Everyone was a farmer, not everyone was a business person. When you cut and harvest your fields, you must leave the corner. A peah is a corner. You must leave the corner of your field unharvested, uncut. How big is a corner? If you think about it, that's subject to every single person's own. Look at the squares on the boxes here. So is this a corner or is this a corner? How big is the corner of the box? It's up to you. Are you more generous or are you more not generous? But anyway, you're supposed to leave the corner unplowed. And finally, Veleket Ketzir Chalot Laket. And as you're gathering in the sheaves, anything you're carrying that drops, you're not allowed to pick up. You have to leave it behind. That's the halakha. So first of all, you got to be really careful. Or you decide time is money, and I'll drop certain sheaves, and Torah says I have to leave them behind, but I got a big job here. We had a beautiful, bountiful harvest, and I can't stand here all day worried that I'm carrying, 10 sheaves, and I'm going to drop a sheaf. If I'm going to carry one at a time, I'll never get done. So you drop some sheaves. So what's going to happen in chapter 2 is that Ruth, they're starving. They have nothing. And Naomi's an elderly lady, and she can't go around to fields carrying sheaves. Ruth is going to go at Naomi's behest to a field, find a Jewish farm field where they are gathering barley and look for dropped sheaves and pick them up. That's our custom. We don't do it that way in Moab, but that's how the Jews do it. They're going to leave sheaves on the ground, not on purpose, but it's going to be there. So don't worry, you're not stealing. The law expects that people like you will show up and pick up sheaves. So pick up sheaves of barley. The only problem is you're going to be in a farm, and the people that work in farms are not necessarily all graduates of, I was going to use an Ivy League college, but they're not in current shape. They're not all graduates of Yeshiva University and Hillsdale College. You have a lot of grubby people, a lot of gruff people are carrying sheaves. That's what they do for a living. You have good people, a lot of good people, but also gruff people. That's how they make their living as farmhands. And you normally don't find women in their midst gathering sheaves. They're allowed to, but they're going to get physically, sexually harassed. They're going to get whistled at, and they're going to be touched, and they're going to be touched in improper places. And if you go into such a place, better be very careful, because we're desperate. We need the food, and there's nothing else to do, and I can't go with you, and you're going to be amid them, and what's going to happen is she's going to go, and by God's miracle and grace, she ends up in the field that the very wealthy judge of the generation, Boaz, owns. She goes into Boaz's field. She doesn't know who he is. She doesn't have anything to do with him. And Boaz sees, I've never seen this before. There's a woman in the field gathering sheep. I can't believe it. What's going on? And they tell him, he's just come back. His wife just got buried. And they tell him, she's the one, because Boaz is related to Elimelech, the husband of Naomi who's dead. They're relatives, a little bit distant, but not very distant. It doesn't tell us quite what the relationship is, but it tells us that he's close enough in relationship to be among the first rights of refusal to marry Ruth, but he's not that close. So they tell him, she's the one. You heard about the guy that came back with Naomi from Moab? She's the one. She converted to Judaism, and she's gathering sheaves. He's so overwhelmed by who and what she is that he gives very strict orders to his farmhands. No one lays a finger on her. No one touches her. I better not find out that anyone touched her. You leave her alone. And on top of that, I am instructing you all to drop some sheaves on the way into the storehouse. I don't want her running around looking for one sheaf here and one sheaf. I want you dropping sheaves this year. Don't make it a habit next year, but do it for her. And so the story goes from there. We'll break now only because of time. And maybe next week, I'm just calling an audible. Let me think about it. Maybe next week we'll do chapters 2 and 3 and 4. I'll finish up, but it is too late. I owe you to let go now. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbat, a wonderful Shavuot. I'm getting one or two signals like this that I should do it. So we'll take it from there. Okay, thanks very much. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, and enjoy your blintzes with meat, but not together with me. First the blintzes, then the meat, not first the meat, then the blintzes. Let me get out of here before I say something awful. Bye-bye.